This is Ed Petke with the Americans in Wartime Experience. Today's date is October 15th, 2022, and I have the pleasure of sitting down with Mark Stephensen in Virginia Beach, Virginia. How you doing, Mark?
I'm doing well, thank you.
Good, welcome. Glad you're sitting down talking with us. Can you give me your full name and where you were born?
Mark L. Stephensen II. I was born in Owatonna, Minnesota.
Okay. And what brings you to Virginia Beach this weekend?
I am representing the National League of PWMI Families at a Southeast Regional meeting being held here in Virginia Beach.
Okay. And Mark Stephensen, how's that relation to you?
As my father.
And what branch of the service did your father serve in?
United States Air Force.
Was he enlisted, commissioned?
He originally was enlisted. He wanted to be a cook.
He wanted to be a cook?
Yeah.
Okay.
And when the Korea War was going on, and they had offered program air cadets for pilots, and so he qualified, was accepted, got a discharge, honorable discharge, and enrolled in the cadet program, completed that, received his commission and his pilot's wings.
Okay. So he served in Korea first?
Barely.
Okay.
His squadron was transferred over. They were waiting for the aircraft to come in, and the armistice was signed.
So that would have been 50?
About 54.
4? Okay. So when he came out, when
check that. He had finished pilot training, so yeah, it would have been late. It would have been it would have been 1954. I'm sorry.
So when he came back out, so when he went back in, what year did he go back?
Well, he was just squadron was transferred to Misawa, Japan.
Okay.
And he was checked out at that time to fly in the RF-84F.
RF-84F.
Yeah.
And what kind of plane is that?
That's reconnaissance.
Reconnaissance. Okay. Is that a propped plane?
No,
or
jet.
It's a jet plane.
Jet, like second generation jet, very, very loud. I think it was still subsonic.
Okay. 2-seater?
No, single.
Just single, okay. So he's doing it all.
Correct.
And what unit was he assigned to when he went over to Vietnam?
The 11th Tactical Reconnaissance Squadron out of Udon, Thailand.
And how long had he served in Vietnam before he went missing?
He had 94 missions
94,
from October to April 29th, 67. Actually, 94 missions, 6 combat support missions, but you needed 100 missions. After 95, your last 5 missions, you really don't go up to Hanoi.
Okay.
You get 5 missions anywhere but downtown.
Okay. And what was his basic missions out there? What was he surveilling? Anything and everything, or is anything specific?
The RF-4C had both infrared and optical cameras. They would do pre-strike and post-strike missions mostly. Some of those would have been weather check. Some of them would have been daylight. Again, post-strike type of missions.
Damage assessment and stuff like that?
Correct.
Where did your dad grow up?
South Jordan area of Utah, outside of south of Salt Lake City.
So when he went down and he went missing, what were the circumstances behind that? Do you know how he came to be missing?
It was April 29, 67. It was a nighttime pre-strike infrared mission over one of the railroad bridges. It may have been the Paul Daimler Bridge, which had multiple strikes against it. So it was an infrared pre-strike to determine if any new weapons were there, new trucks or anything to that effect. They were last radio contact was around 11 o'clock, and they were inbound. They got over the target. Target was socked in with weather and rain, so they aborted. They egressed to the northwest towards Thud Ridge, then turned southwest towards Laos. They were doing about 500 knots, 200 feet. Navigator said it was like flying in a bottle of ink. It was pitch black. And threat warning came on. They dropped down to 100 feet, still doing 500 knots. They were looking outside for missile flares, tracers, and then the second threat came on. Gives that deedle. And so he looked back to the rear seater will look back to his radar scope, the hood. He saw two ground contacts. It was first generation terrain following radar. He reached for the stick. The stick was already pitching, coming back. The nose pitched up 10 degrees, and his instrument panel exploded, flame. He looked out of the side, right side of the aircraft. It was on fire. He looked forward. The seat was still there, but it was not on fire. He heard screaming in his mic, in his helmet, and realized it was him. There was burning fuel coming down the back of the seat. He looked forward again. The seat was still there. He reached down and ejected. As he was going out of the aircraft, he saw that it was fire. It was on fire, but it was still flying. This is around midnight. He blacked out. He was badly injured. His back was badly injured, and he was burned. He came to 6 o'clock in the morning, saw firelight on the sky across the valley there, heard trucks. He evaded. He couldn't move very fast, but he evaded for 36 hours. He tried calling on guard, no contact, no response. He was picked up by a local village chief, or local village, taken to the chief where he was cared for by, he said, a very nice man. But they turned him over to the North Vietnamese, and he was taken to Hanoi.
And this is April '67.
That's correct. No word. He heard nothing. We'll get into that, but yeah, he had no idea what had happened to my dad.
So, contact completely lost. They knew approximately the last about location of his plane?
Correct. I don't remember if in the debrief that they talked about giving out location. There was reports on the search that went on. Mm-hmm. They kept calling on guard. They heard no response. He said he was calling out on guard channel, and nobody, apparently nobody heard him. So we didn't even know he was alive for 3 years when the first letter came out.
Okay, so how was that? How did that notification come in to your family?
Air Force casualty advised that Gary had gotten a letter to his family.
Okay.
Gary Sigler was his navigator, his backseater, navigator,
okay.
Weapons, Wizzo, whatever you want to call it. But
so he delivered that letter himself?
No, it went through the Red Cross.
Okay.
Yeah, it got to his family through the Red Cross.
Okay. So we interviewed some other people, and seemed to be varying different ways of notifications were made, from a military official and a chaplain would show up to somebody said they just got a Western telegram, Western Union, with no accompaniment. That next day, it was Sunday morning, I was downstairs in the kitchen. We were getting ready to go to church, and a blue staff car pulled up with a white roof. Mm-hmm. And we know that wasn't, it wasn't that unusual, and I had no reason, okay, here is it. The wing commander was getting out, and I thought, well, that's, Dad must have passed on a message, and maybe he just stopped by on his way. Then I saw the chief of chaplains get out, and I go, that doesn't look right. And then when I saw the head flight nurse, because Mom was a volunteer at the hospital, she got out. I yelled it to my mom, "You better get down here. It's Colonel Patterson." So how old were you at this time?
I was 12.
12. So old enough to understand and realize what was going on.
Correct.
Okay, so when they came to actually deliver the news, was everybody there? Did Mom usher the kids away, or?
No, we were all right there. She sat down on the couch. They sat down next to her. I remember the other standing around, but we were standing there watching the whole thing.
And brothers, sisters?
I have one brother and two sisters.
Okay. Oh,
I'm the oldest.
You're the oldest. Okay, so you're the older brother. You're the one they're probably looking to. How's that?
I remember distinctly a small voice in my head said, "Now it begins." And I had no idea what that meant, maybe till a little bit later on.
Right.
But I heard that, and then we several of their families showed up. If you can imagine, we got taken across the street to some friends. Why, my mom was there with all those people in the house.
Right. So, when they deliver this message, is it he's a missing message, or is it he's a killed in action message?
No, it was just as aircraft failed to return.
Okay.
It was beyond when the fuel is exhausted, they initiated a search.
Okay. And how long would this have been after he actually went down?
His fuel, just conjecture on my part was that fuel would have been exhausted probably, any time after 12. I mean, between 1:30 or so. No return, no contact. They had those orbiting controllers, no radio contact there. So that would have probably been later that morning.
Right. And then they come to your house. How long later that same day?
Well, it would have been the same. Yeah, it was pretty fast.
Wow, okay.
Well, the dateline issue, I never really tried to reconcile what it was, but.
So is that an aircraft fails to return? That's different than a MIA status.
No, he was classified as missing in action.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how long did that status remain?
Until 1975, when there was a presumptive finding of death by the Secretary of the Air Force.
Okay.
And that was done for everybody.
Right.
All branches, all services. This was initiated after there was a couple lawsuits by families who were left destitute.
Okay.
Their pay wasn't forwarded on, so they sued and got a injunction or something, but it was a preliminary finding of death that compelled all the secretaries of all the services to review the files. Unless there was evidence to show that they were alive, they were classified as KIA BNR.
And that was across all services. That was the date for everything.
That was correct. There's only one that was left out. Air Force Colonel Charles Shelton was as more of a symbolic gesture to show that continuing on the ongoing situation of missing in action.
The honorary.
I think it was the worst thing they could have done. It destroyed their family.
So it keeps them in that state of limbo.
Yeah. Well, the conflict within the family. Eventually, his wife committed suicide.
Terrible. So, having a loved one, your dad missing, not coming home, that's got to be incredibly difficult. What does that toll take on the family?
I think it had to do a lot with the wives. My mom was a consummate Air Force wife. We stayed on base for a year or so because of some friends who a pilot across the street who we hung out with. He didn't want to go to Vietnam, and so he got out and went to California, Palm Springs, and so Mom went down to visit them, and liked it, and moved us down there for 2 years. And it was a bad move, and she recognized it and got us back on base. Living in the civilian population between 69 and 70 wasn't the best place for a military family.
Sure.
We were very isolated.
Okay. And I assume, also it being a very unpopular war at the time, being off base had its challenges.
That's correct. It was, Palm Springs seemed to be somewhat separated from the rest of the real world, being a resort town like that. But it was, we didn't have anybody to talk to. Nobody understood. If they did, it wasn't really mean-spirited that we had, not as bad as some families did, but it was just a disconnect. We just didn't really have any real connection. And so we fled back. And at the time, I was having a lot of fun. I mean, it was a crazy place to be, but it was the smartest thing my mom could have done. And we moved back on base. Because then that was in the early 70s when the protests really got bad. And there was even a protest that was outside the gates of Mountain Home Air Force Base where we were at. A tent city got set up and the signs and the protest. But that was one of those life lessons I had. There was an Air Force officer, one of the pilots. He said something that was profound to me, and it still is today. He said that he'd drive by that every day and it would just get enraged because he knew the men, that died missing, families going through. But he said, I may have contempt for what they're trying to say, but I will defend to the death their right to say it.
It's a very noble, yet I'm sure very difficult and challenging position to take.
But they meant it. Because
sure.
they put their lives on the line to do it. I mean, even while we were there those years, I graduated high school in '72 and left, but there were pilots who were dying in training accidents there at the base. So it's a very dangerous profession.
Sure. So, to back up for a minute, if I understood you correctly, and correct me if I didn't, there was a navigator in the plane with your dad?
Correct.
What do you know? What, if anything, what was his status? Was it the same?
He ejected. He was badly injured, but he was
recovered.
Yeah, he was captured, taken to Vietnam to Hanoi. He was put in the prison system there. He was a second lieutenant at the time, and they were treated a little bit better than the field grade officers. My dad was a major at the time, and they were treated more harshly because they were harder to. The communists thought it was easier to indoctrinate the younger junior officers.
Sure.
But he was at one point he was right after this Sante raid. They were taken to China for, he said, about 6 weeks, loaded in boxcars, taken up there, and eventually they were all brought back and kept in a much better condition there in Hanoi.
And had you or the family had contact with him subsequent to that?
Only 3 letters came out during the whole time he was there.
And how about when he came home?
He got debriefed, checked out medically.
Yeah.
Within a couple weeks or so, he came out, flew out to Mountain Home to see us.
Was he able to give any insight to you guys, or answer any questions, or give any comfort?
The only thing he had is that that's all they did, 24/7. 7 days a week, memorizing names and memorizing about each other, names, families, places where they lived, in the whole bit, in order to keep that mental roster of who all was there, so they can make sure that everybody was going to get out. Right. He said only once did Dad's name pop up, and he just thought it was like an echo in the prison system, and they were just kind of bouncing around because they were always asking, "Who did you know? What was?" Right. All right, we're looking for X, that type. We're looking for this guy or that guy. Right. What have you heard?
Was he able to? Was he open and receptive to answering questions for you and your family?
Oh, absolutely.
So you had a pretty good understanding as to kind of the minute-to-minute details of that last mission.
We still have copies of his debrief.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So and I say that to say that there were some times where they don't want to have contact with family because of guilt or because of whatever. So he kept in touch, which I'm sure helped.
A couple. My brother spent a couple summers with him working on his ranch, his farm. So it was fairly easy. That's always been a very positive. Not very much contact as such. He has his life to live, and he's not an adopted father or anything. Right. So, but always very. Very warm, very cordial. I went and visited him once after that, and when he got back, and the same thing. It was we actually took me out in the field and put me to work. I had to hoe beets with him, and we were having dinner. I was only there for like 2 nights, and one dinner he got a phone call. It was some young lady, some high school student wanted to interview him on the POWMIA issue. He goes, "Hold on a second. I have somebody here," because he knew I was involved with the League of Families. Yeah. I have somebody here who could tell you all about it. And so she happily listened to me, and I interviewed with her about an hour and a half or so, telling her about all the different things, pretty much telling you what I'm saying, what I'm telling you.
Right. So, what measures that, if any, have the U.S. government taken to try to locate your dad?
There really was being a multi-crew with multiple crew with one recovered. There's a higher probability of accountability, but there was no crash site to investigate. It was just a matter of what would. If it hadn't been for that, it would have been an off-the-scope type of loss.
Okay. They had literally no idea where he was and where he went down.
No. And again, it was just, if Gary had gotten out, like a lot of these cases, they just failed to return.
Sure.
So you have this, you're in Thailand, North Vietnam, you have 10,000 square miles, mountainous terrain.
Needle in a haystack.
I've flown over that twice in helicopters through Laos into North Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
You could hide an army in the jungle there, and the mountain is just unforgiving.
So, I guess in relation to that, you don't. There's really no way to know if he was KIA instantly, if he was taken prisoner.
That's correct. If he, there's a lot of speculation and conspiracy theories saying is that there was a whole swath of prisoners that were just kept back, ones with certain skills, certain intelligence, issues that they could have gleaned, all sorts of conspiracy that came about on there. But when you looked at the returnees, they were all ranks, all dates of loss, all ranks, all capabilities. So there really wasn't anything to say is that they took out, that they kept all the, senior officers who were, there's one guy who was an astronaut, I think, or astronaut qualified. But all that was pretty much across the board. So in my personal opinion, I think it still is a matter of, if the North Vietnamese communists kept anybody, they were a liability very quickly, because they hadn't turned them over again. And there's also speculation, but I invited gentleman, Colonel John Dermisi, to speak there at Mountain Home. I'd set up an event, and he pretty much just said the same thing. Our job was to make sure, and they stood there on the tarmac, nodding to themselves, agreeing, says, if there's somebody who's not here, we're not going. We'll pitch a fit. And he says they looked around, they counted noses. As far as they knew, they were all there. But there's been speculation. Sure. There was supposedly a third bus in the background that cameras picked up with people on it, that type of thing going. Then if they were all taken out and shot, because why would they hold them? And most of these guys are in their 80s and 90s now. Right. What's the point?
Exactly. Or somehow word would have gotten out, or somebody would have seen something.
And I studied all that. Being on the board of directors and things, we heard those things. We had to, argue, deal with the ramifications. It really did impair and impede the negotiation. Like when Bo Greitz snuck into Laos, the Laotians quit talking for a year, and there were almost more than at least 200 or more cases that were idle.
Right. So you mentioned a little bit back that you've flown over that area a couple of times. Were you there trying to find answers, or trying to be in the area where your dad was shot down? Had you gone back for that specific purpose?
No, it was. I was on two National League of Families delegations. Okay. To participate in negotiations that were going on with the Vietnamese and Laos and Cambodia, and we were invited to visit crash site excavations and grave site excavations. Both times I did it twice. Both times they were in Laos. Mm-hmm. One was in Savannakhet Province, the other, which is to the south, on the Ho Chi Minh Trail, southern part of Laos, and the other were up north near the Plain of Jars. As a matter of fact, one of them, a guy by the name of Earthquake Magoon, who is dropping supplies over to Bien Dien Phu, and we were looking for his gravesite.
I would assume somebody with that name would be doing exactly that.
He was a large fellow. He flew C-119s, and they had to make up a custom-made cockpit for him to fit. Large guy. We eventually landed at that site. They found his co-pilot and the kicker, the guy who stood in the back and kicked things out the back door.
So, you're in Virginia Beach this weekend for a specific purpose. Can you tell us a little bit about the organization and the group that you're here with, and what they offer, services they offer for you guys?
The National League of PWMI Families was formed in 1970, mostly wives and parents, but mostly wives, who were basically having to deal with the lack of information and the reports of torture and ill treatment and failure to provide information on who they had. And so they incorporated and started to meet on an annual basis here in D.C. There in Washington, D.C., ostensibly for government briefings. But it allowed them to get together and start to form up across the country and organize efforts to contact congressmen, deal with public education, public awareness, actively seeking better treatment and more information. My mom was part of the delegation that went to Geneva and to Paris, that they were there during the Paris peace talks to seek information and support, and requesting the Vietnamese communists give more information. So this organization, since then, has continued on, even after the return. My dad's remains were returned in 1988, 21 years. When Ronald Reagan was dismantling the Soviet Union with a checkbook, the Vietnamese were no longer a client state, so they became very cooperative, and remains started coming out. Instead of trickling out in 2, 3, or 4 at a time, they were coming out in dozens at a time.
Oh, wow.
So it was in April of 1988.
So at that time, when they returned, is there any information as to where they were recovered from? At least a better idea than you had before?
No.
Nothing at all?
It was just a box with remains, obviously stored and warehoused. Like we felt there had been like 400 some remains, same way. They've been recovered and taken to North Vietnam, and pursuant to a directive by the North Vietnamese Army. And just a condition of the remains, 80% conducive to massive trauma. From
which you would expect to see.
High speed, low angle crash of a jet. But 80% remains a good forensic dental. I actually met the forensic dentist who did it. There was a part of the jaw, and my dad had bad teeth, and so post-mortem X-rays matched X-rays he had before he went.
So it's confirmed. You're satisfied that those are the remains of that?
Absolutely. We had the opportunity to get a second opinion, but it seemed to be conclusive. All the reports we had on there had been signed off by, after peer reviews and everything, everybody up and down the line all concurred.
Okay. So I imagine between 67 and 88, there's a lot. I mean, it's a lot of what if, and there's got to be. It doesn't make it easy, but there's got to be some semblance of closure at that point in 88. With remains return.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it was a tremendous relief, and being on the board of directors, I knew what it'd take to get to that point, and how fortunate we were. And at that time, there still would have been 2,400 and some that remain unaccounted for, and so and probably with low probability of accountability on most of them. A third of those were lost over water. So it was. I felt very fortunate.
So obviously, we're sitting down and videotaping this today, and sometime soon you're going to get a copy of this, and you're also going to get some information on how to submit it to the Library of Congress.
Okay.
So years from now, your great 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 grandchild or someone else who is, looking for some information on Vietnam may stumble upon this this video. What would you want them to know about your dad?
It still hurts. He had a great sense of humor. By example, he taught us about duty. And in essence, it was what he was fighting for was worthwhile. Defending the liberty of others meant a lot. He was a pilot. He loved to fly. He wouldn't have done anything else. And that is a profound sense of duty that's worth even dying for, the freedoms that we have. And I'd want them to know that if they do have to defend their freedom, the freedom of their families, be prepared to go all the way. Because not only his example, but the example of those thousands who remain unaccounted for. And that's what we've been seeing this last several days, a lot more faces and names and what they stood for and what they were willing to sacrifice and make the sacrifice without hesitation. And reading about or hearing about those men who got medals of honor and the sacrifices that they did. It's profound. It's beyond humbling. I feel ashamed sometimes that I take for granted the freedoms we have, even doing this. The tremendous cost. And we're going to be asked to do it again. And I hope that men and women who see this, who have had to step up and do that, will know that there were those of us who weren't going to let them be forgotten.
Amen. Is there anything else you'd like to say about your dad?
It was an honor to be at the same dinner table with him. We lived with a hero. And they talk about sometimes, where do these men come from? Small town in Utah. And his brother Mont, a captain in the Army Air Corps, the B-26 pilot, was listed as missing in action in December 23rd, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge. He was 27 years old, had over 70 missions over Europe. He was killed. He was supposed to rotate home for Christmas. Battle of the Bulge hit. He volunteered to stay and was shot down. So my grandparents got 2 telegrams. His remains were recovered after the end of the war and brought back, so they're both buried together in Riverton, Utah. So my dad went to Vietnam. I mean, he was a pilot, got into pilot training, I think probably because of his older brother, but he knew the risk.
Mr. Stephensen, I'd like to thank you for sitting down and speaking with us today.
It's my pleasure.
I'd like to thank you for your dad's service.
Thank you, sir.